In the last episode, we had a look at the foundation of the South Sea Company. This episode, we are going to start having a closer look at how Newton fared through the worst financial bubble of his time. Now you might be thinking, hold on a second, wasn't Newton just a scientist? So how can we judge him for making bad investment decisions and falling for the traps of blunt? You see, besides being a profound alchemist, theologist, astronomer, physicist, and a mathematician, Newton was a first warden and then master at the Royal Mint. He was also a member of British governing elites and was actively involved in major changes in monetary policies. The most remarkable being the move from silver to gold as the standard, a move later followed by the world. And also, besides his debacle with the South Sea stock, Newton by all means was a cautious investor. Being already a wealthy man, he parked all his money in government bonds that provided him with a steady flow of income. All good until he jumped the train of making quick bucks. He did lose a substantial fortune, but not enough to make him broke. In fact, he died a very rich man. Now coming back to the 1720s bubble, and before we get into how and how much Newton lost, we have to make a few things clear. There aren't any investment records of the South Sea Company, as all the records were destroyed when the company closed its door in the 1850s. So how can we estimate Newton's losses? Well, there are certain leads that can shed some light on exactly how much he invested, when he invested, to get a fair estimate of his losses. The main sources being Newton's letters, instructing his agents to carry out transactions with the possessions he had, records of Newton's investments in other securities, Newton's influence over the investment other entities made, namely Thomas Hall Estate, and finally Newton's wealth when he died. Several attempts have already been made to give a fair estimate of Newton's movement during the financial crisis. In 1931, Richard de Villamel used the inventory of Newton's estate to trace Newton's investment history and therefore his 1720 losses. According to Villamel though, Newton did not lose much. Later study done by John Maynard Keynes, maybe influenced by the findings of Richard de Villamel, goes a step further and puts a positive twist to the 1720 adventure of Newton by claiming that Newton was a very successful investor of funds and surmounted the crisis of South Sea bubble. But both these studies have come under heavy scrutiny as more and more evidence of Newton's involvement in the bubble has emerged. So how much did he lose? A conservative estimate puts Newton's losses at around £10,000, whereas a more plausible number would be around £20,000 or more. Inflation adjusted £20,000 of 1720 would be roughly equal to £20 million of today's. Quite a lot, huh? So just a moment ago I was screaming about incomplete records, questionable studies. So then, where did I pull this 20,000 number from? Remember we spoke about the records and letters of Newton's investments in the other securities? Time to have a closer look at these records, huh? Up until 1720, Newton was invested in government securities and few stocks. At the beginning of 1720, it appears that Newton had 10,000 stocks of South Sea Company with an estimated market value of £13,000. His government securities were worth around £19,000, summing up with a portfolio value of £32,000. By mid-1720 though, it appears his portfolio consisted of about 16,300 South Sea stocks, valued at roughly £20,000, indicating a loss of £12,000. Remember, we said that Newton might have incurred a loss of £20,000 and not £12,000? So how did he incur an additional £8,000 loss? You see, to invest in South Sea Company, Newton converted his government securities into South Sea Company stocks, as the company offered such an option. But the price Newton received for his securities from the South Sea Company was much lower compared to what he would have received had he sold the securities in the market. A rough estimate puts that Newton would have made a profit of £13,000 alone on selling his government securities into the market. But he wanted to get into the frenzy of South Sea Company as quickly as possible, and he was willing to accept the loss incurred due to the conversion. Also, that was the only way he could have bought the stocks of South Sea Company. Now to further solidify the claim that Newton did really lose around £20,000, remember earlier on we talked about Thomas Hall Estate? You see, besides being a physicist, mathematician, inventor of calculus, blah blah blah, Newton was also one of the executors for Thomas Hall Estate. The detailed records for Thomas Hall Estate are still preserved, and Newton had partial influence over the investment decisions made by the estate, thus eliminating Newton's views and actions during the bubble. Pulling together all the information we have, this is how the South Sea Company stock evolved. The stock traded below £200 up until January 1720. In February, Blunt proposed to the British Parliament the idea of allowing everyone who owned government bonds, annuities or any other official security to exchange for the company's stock. This would allow adventurous investors holding the government debt to play the stock markets, for additional gains of course. With many MPs either themselves holding the stock of South Sea Company or being bribed, Blunt had the Parliament in his pocket. And after much deliberation, Parliament decided to accept the idea. Results: on the first day after the approval, the stock price climbed by 8%, hovering around £315. Every Tom, Dick and Harry with government securities was keen on getting his feet wet, so was Newton. Investors and gamblers formed London's exchange alley, pushing the price up with new highs. The market frenzy was recorded by author Daniel Defoe, who wrote, "He could not hear the sermon in the church that Sunday for the clamour." He wrote, "While I was in the very porch, I heard a voice cry out loud, 'How goes the stock?' 'Go,' says the other. 'It does not go, it flies.' And fly it did. The stock hit £352 on April 25th and £487 on May 23rd. This is when Newton started selling his pile of South Sea stocks. When Newton was done unloading his stocks of South Sea Company, he was sitting on a hefty profit of £20,000, or 200 years of his formal annual salary as a professor at the University of Cambridge. But wait, weren't we talking that he made losses worth £20,000? So what happened? Well, remember his position and influence at Thomas Hall Estate? Just when Newton was selling off his positions, Thomas Hall Estate started taking positions in the South Sea stock, indicating that Newton still had faith in the company. On June 1, the stock of South Sea Company was trading at £720, and 5 days later at £770. By mid-June, the good old FOMO hit Newton hard. By mid-August, Newton became a true believer and decided to go all in on the stock again. He was willing to pay around £700 to £1,000 a share, almost double the amount he accepted as a seller in the spring the same year. The stock remained fairly stable during the summer, but when shit hit the fan, it hit really hard and fast. On August 31st, the price dropped to £810. In a week's time, the price was hovering around £700 and reached a low of just £570 on September 14th. It should be noted that at every dip, Blunt would come up with a trick to entice investors back again. He allowed investors to buy the stocks at just 20% of the sticker price of the stock, and allowed investors to pay the remaining amount from the profit they made while holding the stock. People who had little appetite for such risky investments went well above their capacities. The South Sea Company made so much profit that it started issuing cheap money to the potential investors willing to invest in the company. But when the stock price reached a staggering £1,000, many investors started realizing their profits, thus creating a cash crunch for the company. For many investors, the circus could go only so far. As more investors started abandoning the ship, on the 1st of October the price dropped to a low of just £290, wiping out all the gains it made from its rally in April. There are no records of Newton selling his positions. Well, thanks to his diamond hands, Newton's losses were catastrophic. To reiterate, a fair estimate would put the cumulative losses around £20,000, or £20 million in today's money. So Newton was nothing but a bag holder after all, huh? Following his losses, Newton remarked, "I can calculate the motions of heavenly bodies, but not the madness of the people." Now this brings us to an interesting question. Did anyone benefit from this bubble? Yes, indeed. A fellow named Thomas Guy. Unlike Newton's, there is a precise record of Thomas Guy's movement. Guy started liquidating his position when the stock price was between £340 to £600. Overall, Guy made a whopping profit of around £175. £100,000. Guy went a step further. He believed that the stock was overpriced and doomed to collapse. So he started taking short positions on the stock. But as the price kept climbing, he was forced to close his short positions at a cost. Short squeeze, anyone? But the losses he made on his short positions were marginal compared to his profits. To put it into perspective, when Thomas Guy died in 1724, he was worth about £300,000, or 300 million in today's money. Also, remember Sir Robert Walpole, who was thrown into prison for opposing Blunt? Well, even he was invested in the South Sea Company and made quite a fortune by realizing his profits when the stock price was at its apex. The financial losses weren't the only calamity that Newton faced. Considering the genius mathematician Newton was, it was quite a shame that he could not recognize the enormous risk the ballooning price of the stock possessed. In fact, Archibald Hutchison, a member of Parliament, did run the numbers as early as March to conclude that the South Sea stock was highly overpriced. Investigations in the years following the bubble suggested that the South Sea leaders, spearheaded by Blunt, did all they could to pump the stock. To say the least, South Sea Company used its profit to lend cheap money to anyone interested in purchasing these stocks. Secret buybacks were carried out, derivatives and other complex investment products were offered. When the stock price was at its highest, the South Sea Company was valued well over £300 million of 1720. The government debt that the company was supposed to offset stood at meager £31 million. And still, not that many managed to put the 1 plus 1 together and understand that the numbers just does not add up, as all were busy trying to get rich. The prospects of making money blinded even the wisest man like Newton. And if he could, so could anyone else. It is easy to call Newton on his decisions today, yet future generations will question the madness of recent financial crises. Like the 2000.com, 2008 housing market, Bitcoin frenzy, the short squeeze frenzy, you name it. Newton's failures to recognize the bubble has been echoed time and time again. Each time investors are offered with a too good opportunity, they convince themselves that this time it is different, and history gets to see itself repeat all over again. We never learn, do we? So when the dust settled, what happened to the South Sea Company? The company did not cease its operations. On the contrary, as early as 1722, South Sea Company administered over 80% of the British government debt. Following the bubble, the Bank of England considered purchasing a large allotment of South Sea stock at a price of £400. This did create a momentary excitement among the investor, which is visible by the peak at the end of September. The Bank of England did not go through though, and the stock price eventually drifted down to a roughly £120 in mid-1721. Even though it is believed that Newton forbade anyone to speak the words South Sea Company in his presence, he was invested in the company till his death in 1723. His investment records at the time of his death suggest that he must have had 5,000 South Sea stocks and 5,000 South Sea annuities. That's it for today. In the next episode, we will cover another such interesting story from the world of finance. Until then, goodbye.